Hello everybody and welcome back to another visual effects demo. Today we are going to be diving right into Niagara, exploring the different templates and how to create them, and the various different modules that we are going to be using for our visual effects. Um, Before I get started, I'm going to go back to the master material that we created last session. So this is the M_underscore emissive translucent. And basically what I want to do here is to add a little bit more functionality so that I have the option to stop rotating or just use the one texture. And so uh, to do that, we are going to use what's called a static switch parameter. So I'm just going to go ahead and right click and look up static switch parameter. And this gives me a boolean, which is a true or false type of operation, where I can have either a true statement and a false statement, depending on the condition that I want to set. So for this first statement, I'm going to I want to have just sort of the one. I want to have the option to just use the one texture or have two textures. And the reason I want to do this is because sometimes I don't need the rotating texture. Sometimes I just want a straightforward flare type of texture. And so I'm going to go ahead and go name this use second texture. There you go. So this is my statement. This is my if statement. So if this is true, uh, if I want to use the second texture, if this is true, I'm going to go ahead and plug in the multiply. This one where it multiplies both of the textures, right? And I'm gonna plug that into true. If this is false, I just want to use the one texture. So I just want to use this one, right? So if it's false, I'm just gonna plug this power node, the texture one power node, into false. And so that means, okay, if this is set to true, as you can see, there's a checkbox here. If this is checked, then it's gonna use true. It's gonna use the multiply. It's gonna multiply both of these textures. And then if it's unchecked, it's just gonna use this path, which is just texture one, right? So to be able to use this, I'm going to plug this boolean into our particle color and particle alpha node. So I'm just going to plug this into the multiply here, and then the multiply here. And so now we have a true or false. We have basically a branching path of material. So this is just a little bit of functionality that I want to add. The other one is to be able to use rotation. And so I just want to maybe duplicate this and go use rotating texture. And so if this is true, I'm going to go ahead and plug in the custom rotator. And if this is false, I'm just going to use scaling. And I'm going to plug this into UVs, like so. Right? And I can actually duplicate this so that it works for both textures. So I can basically duplicate this parameter. Then we're going to do, again, same thing. There you go. So what will happen now is that if I hit apply on this, and then I go back to my instances, now I have the option to either use rotating texture or secondary texture. So if I just use rotating texture, I'm going to get the rotation parameter back. And then if I use secondary texture, I'm going to get my texture 1, texture 2 back. And so that just makes it, you know, a little bit more versatile, a little bit more usable in terms of the, you know, the variety of situations that I want to be using this master material in. So that basically is that. You might have to go into your material instances to, you know, tweak some of these values. If all of a sudden they break, all of a sudden they don't work anymore. For this one, for example, I'm going to go back to my previous rotating version. So that I have a rotating version and a static version so that I can, you know, mix and match, play around with these. That about does it. Now I can sort of jump into the Niagara system part of this video. So to do that, I already have a Niagara folder. You should go ahead and create your own. So just make sure that your files are organized. So I'm going to go ahead here, and I already have this. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. And so now I have an empty folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a Niagara system. So I'm going to right click here, create a Niagara system. And it's going to bring you to this sort of interface. It's going to ask you if you want to use a template. I recommend doing so, and I recommend going with SimpleSpriteBurst. And the reason I want that is because that template is already going to have all of the functionality that we want to kind of explore. So hang on, I'm just going to rename this into ns underscore sparks, I guess, because we're starting with a sparks effect. Actually, you know what, I'm gonna ns level 1 underscore sparks. There you go. I'm gonna go ahead and double click that to open the Niagara system, and here we can now see, if it would allow me to. So here we can now see the Niagara system. As you can see, it starts off with two nodes. So the blue node is the system node, and this has all of the system properties. We're not going to go into this yet because we don't have to at the moment. There are going to be instances where you modify some of the settings here, but for the most part, you can kind of leave that alone. And if you chose SimpleSpriteBurst, then it's going to start with this SimpleSpriteBurst emitter. So these nodes, orange nodes, are called emitters, and these are going to be what's responsible for spawning your particles. If you look at the right-hand side of my screen, I'm just going to sort of drop my Niagara system into the map like so, and you're going to see the particle appear on the map where the Niagara system is spawned. All right, so there it is. That's my particle. That's this particle right here. And the first thing you want to do, you would want to do whenever you work on Niagara systems or on particle systems in general, is to change the material. And so for me, I'm going to go look for my flare here, and I'm going to go to sprite renderer in the emitter. So you can find that down here. And this renderer module here is going to show you all kinds of settings that will sort of affect how the emitter renders your material. So here I'm going to access the material slot, which is right on top. It's the first option that you see. And I'm just going to go ahead and look for, whatever flare or whatever material that I have. And I'm going to just click and drag it over to this material slot. And when I do that, it's going to load a little. But now we have my material, and now it's a particle. Now I can spawn multiple of these. I can give it some physics, I can animate the color, I can animate the scale. And to do that, we are going to have to look into the various different modules that Niagara has. So we can do this sort of section by section and see what each sort of section is supposed to do. So I've already mentioned the sprite renderer. So this is the render section where all of your renderers are going to be displayed. A single emitter can have multiple renderers going off at once, and so it's good to keep in mind where this is and what your renderers are. But for the most part, you're only going to need one renderer for emitter, especially, you know, in sort of the earlier stages of your time as an effects artist. And so the sprite renderer has all kinds of settings. First and foremost, this is where you can set your material, and then you could also set what, you know, the alignment. Are they facing, are they like unaligned, which means they don't have a particular sort of way that they're oriented in world space, and facing mode. So facing mode is basically like, are you where the sprite is facing at all times. And so most by default, all of the sprites are camera facing, which means they're facing the camera at all times. And that's why you get this. If you move around, the sprite is gonna follow you around. And so that means that is sprite, that is camera facing. So for this effect, we're not going to touch any of these, but for, you know, sort of more advanced applications, we are gonna come back to this and fiddle around with these settings. What else is here? There's sorting mode, there's visibility, there's sub UV, where if you have a sprite sheet like I have with my embers, you can set it here as well. And so there's a bunch of options here we're not going to touch on in this video, but it's good to keep in mind that there are stuff that are here that can be important depending on the application that you're going for. And then we're going to go next to the top of the emitter, which are the properties sort of module. And the properties module, this just has a bunch of the particles or the emitter's sort of properties, like, is it in local space? Does it use determinism? Or does it have like fixed bounds, or which resources is it using? Is it using the CPU or is it using the GPU? These are all just sort of optimization, performance related settings. So most of the time you're not going to kind of concern yourself with this. Right now, the more important thing to keep in mind is local space, this local space checkbox. So when you have something in local space, that means if this moves, as you can see, I have the box checked, and if I move the particle, if I move the system, it's going to take the particle with it. So that's local space. Whereas if I have this unchecked, it's going to spawn the particles in world space, which means if I spawn it here and then I move the system, as you can see, it's not following anymore. So it's kind of leaving it behind. And that has a different sort of uses and use cases. For example, for flashes and flash frames and impact frames, you are going to want to use local space most of the time. But for embers or sparks, then those are like small moving particles. You're going to want to use them for world space most of the time. So next we have after that we have sort of emitter summary. This usually we don't concern ourselves with. You don't really, there's nothing really that goes on here. You can edit this, but there's not really much to do in this one. We're going to go ahead and move down to emitter update. So emitter update contains the life cycle of your emitter. Life cycle is important because here you set if the life cycle follows its own system or the system's life cycle, because the system also has its own sort of life cycle settings, and you can set this system, this life cycle mode to follow whatever the system tells it to. And that's a little bit of sort of an optimization issue, or like a concern, because the more emitters you have, the more performance it's going to take up. And if they're all operating on their own sort of life cycles independently, then you're just going to, it's going to be a performance cost. So depending on the budget, you're gonna want to maybe, you know, clump some emitters into just onto the system life cycle, so that it's just the one thing. They're not independent of one another. And so totally up to you. For now, we can leave this to self. And now here you have sort of an inactive response, which is essentially what happens when the emitter's lifetime finishes. So sometimes it's by default it's set to complete, which lets the particles from this emitter sort of finish out their life before completely killing the emitter. There is the more extreme kill setting, which just means whenever the emitter dies, so does every particle that's come out of this emitter. So that's useful for like projectiles. Most of the time we use that for those. Anytime you want something to vanish instantly, you're going to want to set it to kill. And then you have continue, which this is a little bit niche. I haven't gotten the chance to use this very much. So usually it's just complete or kill. Continue is not quite useful in most applications. So for now we'll set it to complete because, well, we don't really want this to, we want this to fade out completely. Then we have loop behavior, which is basically just, is it looping infinitely? Does it loop only once, or does it loop multiple times? So this is just like, how many times does it loop? So it could go on forever, it could burst out once, or you could set it to like multiple. You could set it to loop a number of times manually. So in both infinite and once, you have like loop duration modes. You could set this to also just run infinitely, but you have to be careful with that, because if you have too many infinite emitters, then that might be a significant performance hit, especially if your effect isn't something that needs to loop infinitely or indefinitely. If you want it, you know, for burst effects, most of the time this is set to fixed. But for looping effects, you could set this to infinite depending on your the nature of the particle that you're spawning. And then you could also set a delay. You could set the loop duration. So both of those are sort of self-explanatory. Next, you have the spawn modules. Now, so spawn burst instantaneous. This just means it's going to spawn one particle per every time it loops. And so right now, our SimpleSpriteBurst emitter is set to loop once and then die. So all it's going to do is it's going to spawn one particle, and then that's it. That's all it's going to do. That's why I have to sort of keep resetting it every time, just to kind of show you guys what it does. If I set this to infinite, then it's going to keep spawning once every 2 or so seconds, I believe. Oh, sorry, no, sorry, here, like this one. There. So it's set to infinite, self-infinite. Um, and so every 2 seconds, what it does is it's going to spawn one every 2 seconds. Sometimes you want that, sometimes you want something like that. For impact frames, typically you just want it to spawn once and then burst out, and then that's it. But for looping effects, maybe you want it to kind of loop infinitely, and so spawn every sort of, every interval that you can set on your loop duration. So that's one. There's also spawn rate. The two most common application that you are going to be using is spawn burst instantaneous and spawn rate. Spawn burst and spawn rate. Spawn rate just means it's going to spawn, a number of particles per second. So this is just that this means it's spawning 10 particles per second. It's going to be spawning 2 particles per second. And that depends on the loop duration as well. So this duration is always in seconds. Anything that has to do in time within Niagara is going to be in seconds. So that means, for example, this loop duration is going to be this means 2 seconds. If I wanted to use loop delay, that's also going to be in seconds. If I want to delay it 0.1, that means 0.1 seconds, so on and so forth. So, but yeah, so these are the two most common spawn modules that you are going to be using. Moving on, we have particle spawn. So particle spawn, initially this section, the particle spawn section, is essentially all of the initial values of your particle. So this is where you're going to set the lifetime. This is where you can set the color. So here I can actually modify the color that we set before. So there you go. So now I can tint it. I can do different things. And the great thing about this is I can have multiple layers of sort of different colors to kind of mix and match my particles and mix my layers up. All right, so that's great. You could set sprite size here. You could set offsets. You could set rotations. You could even set the UV to kind of flip randomly, or manually set the rotation or UV flipping. And in initialized particle, this takes into account every kind of renderer that you can have. So this also has mesh attributes. So if you have mesh particles, you could set it here. If you have ribbon particles, you could set it here. And these are just basically initial values of your particle. So here, for example, I can set the lifetime. I can set it to vanish quickly. If I set it to 0.2, it'll vanish quickly, right? I could set it to 1. I could set it to 2, 3. So I could adjust timing using lifetime, and I could adjust shape using sprite size, right? So this is where you're going to set all of those up. I can set color. Right. So this is kind of where all of that that foundational work we did with the master materials, this is where that's going to be applied. And yeah, so I can even set velocity here. So if you click this plus, you can have access to the different you can add a module to this particular section. So I can even set velocity here if I wanted to go a certain direction. So you see I can set a velocity here. So this is already giving it physics, right? I can make it go sideways like that, right? So there's a bunch of these modules that we will be tackling on the go. So but that's kind of So in this particular instance, we don't really need velocity, right? We're just going to want it to flash. Um, and so that's great. In moving on from that, we have particle update, which this has the particle state, which basically this says kill particles when lifetime has elapsed. So essentially, when the lifetime of this, so after 1 second, it's going to completely kill this particle. That's basically what this just says. Essentially, this is when this checkbox is checked. That just means, okay, whenever the lifetime is done, so is the particle. And so it just killed the particle immediately. If you want an infinite particle, this is, you have to edit this. You got uncheck it and basically have that, have that particle go on forever. But for now, we're going to leave it checked and move on to scale color. So scale color, this is where we can scale the alpha. So that's giving it that fade out. If this was disabled, it's just going to appear and then disappear, right? And scale color, so alpha, this one is the one sort of being accessed by our master material here. So this alpha right here, that's the one that's scaling our opacity. And so it's allowing us to fade our particle out. Instead of it just sort of popping out, like if this was off, then it would just sort of pop in and pop out. And so with these curves, we have a number of templates that we can use, right? So right now this is set to ramp down, which as you can see, it starts at 1 alpha, which is fully visible, and then ends up at 0 alpha, which is not invisible at all, right? So we can actually use different curves to set it to, appear and disappear, right? We could set it to flash quickly and then disappear slowly. We could set it to, so we could set it to appear and then kind of fade out, right? So there's a number of applications to this, depending on your sort of visual effect that you're going for. You're going to want to use different curves. But so essentially, this just controls how fast it's going to go and by how much. So this is you have to think of this unfortunately in a more mathematical way, because now you're dealing with what's called a speed graph, which is on the y-axis, this is the value of sort of whatever it is you're trying to scale. So in this case, it's alpha. So on the x-axis, 1 means fully visible, and then 0 means invisible, right? And then on the y-axis on the x-axis is time. So it's always value over time, and this is just going to control how fast and how much it goes. So keep that in mind when you are starting to animate your textures or your materials. And so there's a bunch of these. I call them scalars because there's also a way to scale the sprite size from here. So in particle update, you're gonna go into the plus. You're gonna click this plus, and then you're gonna look at scale sprite size. And so this basically allows you to control the size and animate it over time as well. And this uses lifetime. So the faster the lifetime, the faster the animation goes. So as you can see, if I set it to 0.1 or 0.2, it's going to go a lot quicker. And then if I set it to like 3, it's going to go a lot slower. So keep that in mind when you're working with these curves. Right, so these are scalars. The last module that we have on this template is solve forces and velocity. We call these solvers, and essentially these go after everything else. So this goes at the bottom of the stack most of the time, and Unreal uses this to calculate velocity. So if you're going to work with any kind of add velocity or any kind of force, like gravity, etc., etc., you're gonna have to have a solver, a solve forces and velocity module to be able to calculate those velocities and forces on the particles itself. And so that basically is the number of different sort of modules that this has. Obviously, you can rename this emitter by double clicking on the module's sort of name and title. If I want, I could use I could rename this to like flash_core. So I'll just rename it as that, right? And so yeah, from here we could start we could go ahead and start modifying our particle in preparation for the next task. So for that, we're gonna have to put that into the next video. Okay. All right. See you guys in class.